Final Fantasy has stumbled out of the wilderness. Remasters, remakes, original IPs. It's amazing to see that we're living through a second golden age for the series. I remember the PS3 era, where the games were divisive, and it seemed, even to longtime fans, that the franchise had run out of steam, a shambling, out-of-touch pastiche of cheesy tropes and campy storytelling, more of a parade than a drama. But that was 10 years ago, an electronic epoch, and if there's one thing that this resurgence has taught me, it's that you should never bet against the champ. So in honor of the release of the ominous-looking 16th entry, I wanted to take a trip back into Square's golden age. In 1997, Square Pictures was founded in Honolulu for the singular purpose of leveraging the company's prodigious experience in CG animation to create feature films. It wasn't that crazy of an idea. Pixar had just a few years earlier shattered preconceptions of what an animated movie could be. So, Hironobu Sakaguchi, who had been an integral part of Final Fantasy since the very beginning, wearing hats as a designer, producer, and director, was tapped to lead the development on their first movie. What better choice than your VIP? Influenced by the death of his mother years earlier, he shaped a concept, a science fiction adventure that would pose deeply spiritual questions about the afterlife. It would be the only movie that Square Pictures would ever make. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within was released in 2001, but takes place in the year 2065, 34 years after an alien invasion by invisible beings known as phantoms has devastated the Earth. After decades of stalemate, scientist Aki Ross believes that there's finally a way to peacefully end the war by collecting the spirits of life forms from all over the world. But she's opposed by General Hein, a man whose tragic past has transformed him into a callous warhawk, as well as a phantom infection which is slowly killing her. On her mission, she's aided by grandfatherly Dr. Sid, and her old flame Captain Gray Edwards, and his squad of soldiers known as the Deep Eyes. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. One of the two reasons that anybody remembers this movie nowadays. Spirits Within visuals and characters were extolled as being the most realistic looking animation ever made at that point. Sakaguchi said that they were creating a whole new kind of art form, and everyone on the team seemed electrified by the endeavor. They earnestly believed that they were pushing the boundaries not just of animation, but movies as a whole. The poster proclaims that Spirits Within is unleashing a new reality. Sure, this was bombastic marketing, but it wasn't a lie. The work that the team accomplished was stupendous and groundbreaking. Close-ups show pores, freckles, and wrinkles. Every hair was individually rendered, and motion capture was utilized to create a believable feeling of movement, all frequently overlaid onto flawless matte paintings. Yeah, these are paintings. Sure, all that may seem old hat now, but in 2001, Aki, Gray, Sid, and the rest were the most realistic-looking animated characters that you could find. But there's the caveat. Realistic-looking. Nobody who's watched Spirits Within, even back then, was ever fooled into believing that what they were looking at were actual people, no matter the cheeky branding of the characters as hyper-real. And as even video games have now surpassed in real time what Spirits Within could only accomplish with a render farm, it looks more dated with every passing year. For a lot of people, the movie's appearance damned it. Instead of being enchanted by the illusion, audiences were repulsed by the artifice. There was the sentiment that the characters were trapped in the uncanny valley and couldn't claw their way out. I think it's the biggest hurdle that someone might face to enjoying Spirits Within. Does the movie's look turn you off or not? If you can get past it, there's a lot to appreciate, but I understand if people can't. As an animation lover, I just consider it a peculiar style. What saves the aesthetic from being folly is the animation itself. Aki may not look real, but she acts like it. She emotes with such personality and feeling that some of my favorite parts of the film are just watching her slow close-ups, and Ming-Na Wen brings a surfeit of warmth to her role.
I told her everything had a spirit. Dogs, cats, trees, little girls, even the earth. I told her that she wasn't dying, just returning to the earth spirit.
The music can only be described as hauntingly gorgeous, an orchestra peopled by ghosts, which fits. Instead of hiring Nobuo Uematsu or Yasunori Mitsuda, Stalwarts of their most acclaimed games, the team instead chose Eliot Goldenthal, a New York composer who moves between the worlds of theater, orchestra, and films with equal finesse. His projects are as eclectic as his music, and hearing his score alongside the movie, it's immediately evident that Uematsu would have been the wrong choice. The film needed Goldenthal's majestic melancholy, not Uematsu's romantic diversity. And the theme song he wrote for the movie, The Dream Within, always raises the hairs on the back of my neck. But hey, how's the movie though? Final Fantasy The Spirits Within opens up with Aki on a rocky plain. It's clear that there's something not quite right about all of this. She wakes up, and the film pulls its first trick when it shows us the date. This is the future. Then she gets up from her chair, and we realize that she's not even on Earth. From the beginning, the movie is laying the bricks of its world building. Then it ruins the mystery by having Aki blab some exposition at us. In fact, the whole movie does suffer from a mild case of expositionitis. The funny thing is that, although the alternate opening is way worse in nearly every way, it doesn't have her exposit at this precise moment. It gives us an idea of what the opening might be like if the movie trusted us to bask in the quiet. She lands her ship in the middle of a ruined Times Square. This sequence is the favorite of nearly the whole production team. There's a palpable tension. How could one of the busiest streets in the world become such a graveyard? Things go south as the phantoms appear, and Aki has to be rescued by the Deep Eyes. But not first without salvaging a wispy plant growing at the foot of an angel statue, which the Deep Eyes then blast to pieces when a phantom emerges. In this dead world, innocence only betrays malice, and nothing is sacred anymore. Aki's personality first comes into play here. She's driven, to the point of abrasiveness. The audience is being led expertly to ask questions. Who is this woman, and what happened to the planet? She returns to the New York barrier city, and we learn that the remains of the human populace shelter in cities like this all over the world. Of course they built the barrier over Manhattan, not the Bronx or Queens. But Gray has been infected after contact with a phantom, and Aki commandeers a surgical laser to destroy the infection. Now this is a critical scene. Before, we saw Gray and the Deep Eyes rescue Aki from a volatile situation. But now, they're the ones who can only stand by helplessly as Aki saves Gray. In movies about aliens, conflict resolution tends to occur at the end of a gun. But Aki is a scientist, a PhD at the age of 27, so that's not her way. The movie makes her capable in a way that the Deep Eyes can't be. She can still solve problems without being made redundant by her own co-stars. By the time the action finally settles down, I was completely invested in Aki as a protagonist. I wanted to follow this character. I wanted to see her succeed. Here we meet one of the sparse elements of the movie that tie it to Final Fantasy at all, Dr. Sid. He doesn't have an airship though. In another blatant bout of exposition, we learn from Aki that Sid is a major figure, the lead developer of bioetherics, the technology that protects against the phantoms. So far, this has been an effective, if typical sci-fi story, but it's here that the movie introduces us to its central conceit, and the idea that consoled Sakaguchi all those years ago when his mother died. Sid believes that all living things have a spirit, and that when they die, their spirits return to Gaia, the great life force of the planet that birthed them. If the energy signatures of 8 spirits from all over the world can be gathered and collated, the finished waveform can be used to destructively interfere with that of the phantoms and defeat them permanently. So this is one of my first questions about the plot. If they already know what the phantom's energy signature is, and if they already have the technology needed to broadcast the waveform, why do they need to collect the spirits? Just do some Fourier transforms and get it over with. I've got headphones that can do that. I'm willing to accept that there's some sort of contrivance that the movie doesn't explain, or that I'm just an idiot. Her nemesis in her pursuit is General Hein, and you know immediately he's the bad guy, because he's wearing a SS trench coat and is voiced by James Woods. He's robed in black not just to denote his villainy, but also to juxtapose Sid and Aki, who wear white. In fact, Aki always wears white, a simplistic but welcome symbolism of her purity. Hein wears his clothes like psychological armor. He never takes off either his coat or his gloves, as if he can't bear to touch or be touched anymore, forever putting himself at a distance, to prevent being hurt again. And his hair is efficiently slicked back, no disorder tolerated. When we learn wherefore his vitriol for the Phantoms comes from, it makes sense why he wouldn't want to be touched. The Deep Eyes themselves, Neil, Jane, and Ryan, are all great. They don't go much further than the archetypes that they embody, the tough-as-nails chick, the annoying techie, the gentle giant, but they embody them so well that I actually remember their names. For a 90-minute movie, that's incredible. They get some lively dialogue and are actually useful to the plot.
What's with her?
What's with her and the captain?
What's with her and that stupid plant? What?
For the short amount of time that we spend with them, they come off as good at their jobs and carrying a long history of working together. Other side characters aren't as memorable. When Aki is hunting for the seventh spirit in Tucson, she's accompanied by several faceless, nameless NPCs sent to spy on her by General Hein. This is the first sequence in the movie when people are outright killed by phantoms, but when they're a bunch of nobodies that we were only introduced to a few minutes ago, the deaths don't register in any way, except for the gruesome spectacle. Hein's BFF Major Whatever is almost as bad. He doesn't do much except serve as a sounding board for Hein's conspiratorial muttering. One of the two commentary tracks reveal the cleverness of the Tucson sequence. Now that we're acquainted with the Deep Eyes, we need to be able to see their faces, to view their performances and just to distinguish them from one another. But they can't be without helmets entirely, they still need to be able to do their jobs. So the movie cheats a little bit by giving them half helmets. It gets to show a neat little piece of gear endemic to this world without completely undermining its logic. In the later scenes, they'll be divested of armor entirely and totally vulnerable. There's a lot of that kind of progression in the movie. Aki's dreams also become more desaturated as she approaches death until they culminate in black and white. Hein's obsession to destroy the Phantoms is so all-encompassing that he stages a miniature coup over the Barrier City's controls. His end is to let some Phantoms in as a false flag operation to incite the use of the Zeus cannon. It doesn't go well. The city is instead overrun, and Aki and the jockeys must escape in her impounded ship. This is the weakest part of the movie. It should be a momentous turning point, and visually it's a marvel. Ships are crashing, music is swelling, bullets are flying, but the issue is Hein. Even though they go to lengths to humanize him, Hein comes off as over the top in his zealotry. I think the problem is that Aki and Hein don't actually interact at all. Aki is scavenging for spirits in one place, and Hein is always in a completely different place trying to activate the Zeus cannon. The only time they ever even speak to each other is in a scratchy Zoom call 15 minutes before the credits roll. So Hein ends up feeling disconnected from the protagonists, like he's in his own movie. And even that might be okay if it weren't for a bigger problem. Do you remember what I said earlier about how even though Aki solves problems non-violently, she's still capable, that she's not replaced by the Deep Eyes? Yeah, none of that is true in this middle half hour. First, she's unconscious for a while, then as everyone tries to escape the city and prep her ship for takeoff, the Deep Eyes are the ones orchestrating all of it. Gray and Aki even exchange dialogue that feels like it should come from the other person.
What's happening? Why can't we see them now?
Must be carrying a residual charge from passing through the barrier.
Shouldn't Gray, the soldier, be the one asking Aki, the bioetheric scientist, why they can see the Phantoms? This entire airport sequence is a dead zone, easily the most boring part of the movie. It takes too long and Aki doesn't have anything to do. It's only when the third act kicks off that it becomes her movie again. It's Hein who's constantly doing things. Hein who's pushing the plot forward. When the intensity should be ramping up, he sucks all of the oxygen out of the film, and Spirits Within never really recovers the energy of its first half hour. Despite the plot losing focus, the world design sharpens further. There was so much thought put into designing sets and props that don't just look unique, but belie a natural utility. They look like they could really exist. And I do wish that the world around Aki were more filled out. The stakes are as high as they can be, the fate of the human race, but we don't get to see that many humans. We spend all of our time with high-ranking members of the military. We don't get to know what ordinary people's lives are like. The barrier cities don't look like they can easily be made bigger, so is there overcrowding? Does everyone get to live in Starfleet HQ like Aki, or are they living in Megacity 1? Are food and water scarce? How did they get the raw materials to build all of their future tech, and where is it fabricated? Does the federal government still function now that most of the population lives in just a few cities separated by hundreds of miles of no man's land? How can Hein be a general at the age of 35? Did all of the senior staff die off? And so on and so on. You may feel that I'm being unfair. Rue, it's a 90-minute movie, not an HBO series. We don't need to see the minutiae of how garbage collection or zoning law works. And I'd agree with you. Except that because we only view a thin sliver of the world, the climax of the movie doesn't feel as monumental as it should. The scope of the movie has been very personal, so the climax feels accordingly sized. Instead, it's the special features that have a lot of background info that would have been really meaningful if it were somehow woven into the movie. Aki and Gray head to the meteor crater where the Phantoms first landed to find the last spirit. In the meantime, Hein's deception has worked, and he's finally gotten the go-ahead to blast the meteor with the Zeus cannon. So just when they discover the last spirit to complete the wave, Hein destroys it, and the meteor, and in the process unleashes the Phantom Gaia, the great spirit of the aliens' home world. He also reveals the Earth Gaia and blasts that hippie shit too. At her lowest point, with the Phantom Gaia ascendant and infecting the Gaia of the Earth, the Phantom Spirit inside of Aki, which has been killing her, transforms into the 8th Spirit. This was always something that never quite made sense to me until recently. How did the hostile Phantom become pacified? If you look closely, in her last dream, you'll see that the Phantom pierces her womb and becomes transformed from there. I thought that this was just more symbolism, the ghost of the dead being born again or something. Then I watched the second commentary track and was startled to learn that the reason the Phantom transforms is because Aki is pregnant.
子供イコールその新しい生命が秋の中のファントムと反応して
なんか中和されちゃうみたいな。
I never got this at all before when I watched the movie. It was never clear why the Phantom transforms, but Aki explains it like this.
With the hope of new life, has Gaia changed the Phantom within?
That clinches it. She has to be pregnant. What else could she mean? The plot only makes sense when you know that crucial bit of information. It goes for subtle, but comes off as obtuse. I bet I'm not the only one who didn't get it, and I've seen the film a few times. At the end, when all seems lost, Gray sacrifices himself to transmit the completed spirit wave. How he knew that would work isn't certain, but it's a moving scene nonetheless. Final Fantasy The Spirits Within ends with a hopeful image, a hawk soaring above a mountain valley, flying towards a future brimming with life and possibility. Cruelly ironic if you know what happened to Square Pictures. Yeah, the second reason that you've heard about this movie? That it was a catastrophic flop. On a combined production and marketing budget of $130 million, it only made back $80 million. That's a staggering loss, and it looks even worse when you adjust the numbers for inflation. Square Pictures, a studio that took $45 million just to build, was shut down, and its employees and resources were folded back into Square's video game division to resume the artist's original mandate of creating cutscenes for their games, although they did later release 2 feature films that could more justifiably be called Final Fantasy. Why did the film lose so much money? That's not quite the right question. You should be asking, why did a 90-minute movie cost so much to make? The answer is project bloat and mismanagement. Being Square Pictures' first project from a company used to making video games, there was a learning curve about as steep as K2. The first year and a half was spent just on building the software. The budget ballooned far past its original amount, as elements of the movie were constantly being reworked. So concept artists were hired to create environments for scenes, only for the script to change and those scenes to be cut, rendering months of work obsolete. Motion capture was planned, shot, processed, and then sent to the animators, only for them to notice that the footage didn't align with their digital environments, so they had to scrap all of it and animate from scratch anyway.
It was very interesting working with the mocap. A lot of places, it was perfect for the scene. But in a lot of other cases too, we really needed to add on top of it, or in some cases we had to take it all out and just do it by hand.
All the problems with the film come down to the fact that after 4 years, the script still wasn't finished. But they'd sunk too much money into it, so they had to commit to what they had. Looking online, people contend that it couldn't find its audience. Those who were Final Fantasy fans were turned off because it had piss all to do with their cherished games, and those who weren't fans didn't see the appeal of a realistic Bug's Life. Of these contentions, I find the second is more plausible. $80 million is a suspiciously large amount of revenue if you've supposedly alienated your fans. Wait, why was it called Final Fantasy The Spirits Within in the first place? Well, money, duh. Sakaguchi's original working title for the film was Gaia, but that doesn't tell people anything. You can bemoan that the producers tricked fans, but attaching a recognizable brand to the project was the right call. Think about it. Would people still be talking about this movie now? Would you have even clicked on this video if it didn't have Final Fantasy, rightly or wrongly, in the title? If I were in their position, I would have done the exact same thing. Actually, I think it's more deserving of the title than people say. Yes, it was a marketing gimmick, but think about some of the recognizable elements of a Final Fantasy story. A group of diverse people rebelling against an entrenched authority, adventuring to exotic locales to collect the mystic MacGuffins with the aim of saving the not-quite Earth, pre-rendered backgrounds. I could easily see a version of this movie with more magic spells and spikier hair. But in the end, the gimmick didn't help. Probably nothing could have. When you spend $130 million, you're going up Niagara Falls in a pedal boat. Spirits Within box office and lackluster reviews saddled it with the millstone around its neck of the reputation as a bad movie. But it's not a bad movie. I've always loved it, even though it's not a masterpiece at all. There's just too many ideas bubbling under the surface to discount it. Could it have been better? Watching it again, I was reminded so much of Aliens. Not just because of, well, you know, but because I could almost feel James Cameron's invisible hand over everything. The imagination that went into creating all of the props and sets. And it got me thinking, what if the movie just had real actors on computer-generated sets? I think that this would have been more acceptable to a general audience. Heavy CGI compositing with live performers was just coming into its own and becoming the standard for mainstream blockbusters. But that's not the movie that they wanted to make. The team at Square Pictures wanted to unleash a new reality. They believed in this story, and they believed that this was the best method to tell it. Square even had plans for Aki to become the world's first virtual actress. The idea was to have her appear in different, unrelated movies. Yeah, the furthest they got with that was a demo for the Animatrix and a pinup in Maxim? What the fuck? It wasn't all for naught, though. Rather than abandoning their dream of hyper-real characters in movies as Y2K fodder, they continued it, refined it. Final Fantasy VII Advent Children and Kingsglaive Final Fantasy XV show that the idea can find an audience, as long as you don't spend the GDP of Kiribati attempting it. Sakaguchi left Square Enix a few years later to found Mistwalker, where he now spends his efforts making pay-to-play mobile games that are delisted so you can't even play them anymore. He still lives in Hawaii, as if he were marooned there when the ship sank. He contends that he wouldn't change a frame of the film, that he's very proud of how the project turned out. I can only admire the bravado that it took for Square to bet all its chips on a surprisingly personal experiment of a movie. Aki was the name of Sakaguchi's dead mother. The opening date of the movie is his wife's birthday, and it's his childhood friend's handwriting that fills the pages of Sid's journal. The team made this movie look the way it did for the same reason Sakaguchi created the concept. They questioned whether it was possible for there to be something more than what you've known. Science fiction is rarely this heartfelt and soul-searching. One of the loudest voices in favor of the movie back in the day was Roger Ebert. He gave it 3.5 stars out of 4. But when reading his review, it seems that he was more impressed by the visuals than anything else. And I don't think that's correct. Reviewers who got caught up in the visuals seemed oblivious to all of its little human moments, falsely concluding that it didn't have any. If Final Fantasy The Spirits Within deserves to be remembered at all, it's for the beating heart underneath the metallic veneer. And if you take the chance to look beyond the box office performance, the not quite there character models, and a mountain of cheap shots that the film has taken over the years, you might find The Spirit Within.